Picture this. I'm driving down Main Street last week, sipping my coffee, when I noticed this beautiful looking brick building with a for sale sign out front. This is the same building I've driven past literally hundreds of times, but this time was different. I actually pulled over and I got out and walked around for a few minutes. Some of you know I've built up a pretty solid residential real estate portfolio, over $1 million in properties. But commercial real estate has always felt like a mystery to me. You know, definitely not something someone like a person that started out as an English teacher would get themselves into. But last year, I got a text from my friend Josh, and he invited me to a conference in Orlando for commercial real estate. So I show up and I'm just in this conference room surrounded by a bunch of regular looking people. And the guy next to me, he leans over, you can kind of tell I'm like new to this. And he's like, you know what's crazy? The richest person in most of these cities, they're not the doctors or the lawyers you see on the billboards. It's the guy that owns that boring strip mall that everybody drives by. And it's funny, I laughed and everything, but he got me thinking. Honestly, someday soon, commercial real estate is something that I want to be getting into. And again, before that conference, I was just thinking it's too complicated. But that building on Main Street, the one that I mentioned before, it's always caught my eye. And I found out that the business that's there, it actually pays all the expenses. It's something called a triple net lease. So when I called, I got all this information and I'm looking at the numbers, and the investment would be $165,000 down payment. And based on what he showed me, it's supposed to generate about $46,000 a year in passive income. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, that's more than I made my first year teaching. And then this funny story popped in my mind. I get a text 2 a.m. from one of my residential tenants, and the furnace is making a funny noise. So I'm in my pajamas. I'm asking them, hey, can you text me a video? I'm gonna try to figure out the problem. And it turns out a bird flew down the chimney and got itself caught in the motor. So I'm sharing that story with some of these commercial investors, and they're laughing. They're like, hey, that's not how it works with commercial. So I learned that they actually set up their leases where the tenants handle a lot of the maintenance. And they also pay the property taxes and the insurance. And sometimes the tenants, they even pay to remodel the space and renovate everything. And that's the part of those triple net leases that they really didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, wait a second, so the tenants are just paying everything? And then later on, there was this guy, Steve, he's just sitting at the lobby bar having a drink, and I saw his name tag. He was keeping to himself, but I just started talking to him, and he told me he owns this strip mall in Texas. And he said he hadn't had a maintenance call in 3 years, not even one. And I'm curious, if you're a real estate owner right now, what's your worst maintenance call ever? Just drop it in the comments. I'm wondering if it can beat my 2 a.m. story. So what got me thinking at this conference, I'm sitting in this session hearing about all the different types of commercial properties. And I already sort of knew about and was thinking about, office buildings or strip malls, but there really was a lot more that I hadn't thought about. Going back to that Main Street building, the one that I mentioned before, that's considered retail space. And actually there's a one level walk-up office space on the second floor. But as I was listening in on that conference, I was hearing about commercial multifamily. And those aren't just duplexes. We're talking big buildings with 5 or more living units. And then they mentioned industrial properties. Honestly, I started to get bored there because they just were going on and on talking about warehouses. And I wasn't really listening at the time because it just kind of seemed grimy. But then this presenter got on stage. Her name was Sarah. And she started talking about how she bought this, boring warehouse last year. And take a guess, on what her cash flow was. She bought this warehouse for $800,000, and she used something called an SBA loan to get it with a lot less money down than you'd think. And that first year, she cleared over $95,000 in passive income. So yeah, I'm starting to wrap my head around this commercial real estate game now. And kind of where I'm at, I'm thinking about all the pros and cons of each type of property. Like with retail, you can get those triple net leases, but location really is everything. And that Main Street building, that's prime real estate. It gets insane foot traffic. And so that's why I have my eye on it. With multifamily, that's familiar to me, but it's actually different with commercial because you're dealing with professional property managers and not just those individual tenants. Actually, this old timer at the conference, he and his wife were talking to me. They strictly have commercial residential properties, like 12 units, but a bunch of them. And he said that honestly, his original duplex was more of a headache than the larger 12 units are now. Oh, and there's something else I learned about these different property types that completely surprised me. The banks actually prefer lending on commercial properties. So question for you, what type of properties are you interested in most? Retail space, like I'm looking at multifamily, warehouse? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what is catching your eye and why. Now, talking numbers, I learned something pretty cool about commercial real estate math. And it is totally different than residential, but in a good way. See, with my residential properties, I really just would be looking at the monthly rent. And if I'm trying to buy something new, then I just look at comparables in the neighborhood. But with commercial, there's like 3 numbers that I learned about at that conference that are actually really important. The first is net operating income, but everyone calls it NOI. It's actually pretty simple. Just think of it like whatever's left in your pocket after paying all the bills, but before the mortgage. Then they kept talking about cap rate. And honestly, I got confused because I never use that term in residential real estate. So I think about cap rate now like it's a cheat code for comparing different commercial properties. At the conference, they showed me how cap rate actually helps you find hidden gems. They were talking about the 1% rule and the 2% rule for cap rate. Now, I love this stuff. I love all the rules. So if you're looking at a property that you're going to buy, and let's say it's like $500,000, then it should bring in at least $5,000 in monthly rent to hit that 1% rule. Hit 2% and you might have found one of those hidden gems that we were talking about. That guy that was keeping to himself at the bar, he actually pulled out his phone and showed me on like the calculator, like one of the properties in his area, he said he was hitting like 1.8%. So he actually made an offer earlier that week. So like, as I was thinking of all of that, these really aren't just like random numbers. Like I mentioned before, it's kind of like a cheat code for finding good commercial deals. And then that last number, I was already familiar with it. It was like called cash on cash return. But it's a little different with commercial properties. Really, it's just how much you're making each year compared to what you put in. So keeping it simple, let's say you put in 100K on a property and you're getting like 10K back a year. Well, that's 10% cash on cash return. Something fun to try is to look up a commercial property in your area, like any property, and then just drop the asking price in the comments, and then we can run the numbers like I did for that Main Street property. Talking numbers, commercial loans are totally different too. With the residential properties, I'm used to like 30-year fixed term mortgages, but with commercial, we're talking like 5, 7, 10-year with balloon payments. And a lot of times I'm learning like the increased property value and the rents usually make it work out better anyway. And I mentioned earlier that SBA loan that Sarah used. Similar to that, there's also other types of creative financing. We're talking like getting in on a partnership. There's seller financing where the building owner basically becomes the bank for you. And honestly, these are things I didn't know existed in my little residential world. So what I'm doing right now, literally like this week, I set up a meeting with Mr. Commercial Real Estate Agent. This guy's local, he's been around forever, and he's the guy that does the deals right on Main Street. I'm also talking to my mortgage broker, but she doesn't do commercial. She said, oh yeah, I might want to get into that one day, but I'm going to talk to a lender that I met at the conference. He's a super nice guy. He kind of did a little like in-service like talk on how to structure your first commercial deal. So I basically just want to ask him how it all works. So I started this video talking about that beautiful brick building on Main Street, and I have an appointment to walk through it. I'm excited. I'm nervous. This whole residential to commercial real estate feels like I'm kind of learning a new language, but I am learning, and that conference helped. Turns out, I mean, you probably guessed it, there's a whole community of people who love this stuff. So if you want to learn even more about commercial real estate, I'll simply leave a link down below in the description to that conference that I went to. You can check it out. Just remember, I'm learning right alongside you, and I'll be sharing everything I learn right here on this channel, so make sure you're subscribed.